So without further ado, let's just get right into it, Carl and Randy. Let me introduce Carl. Carl Peterzak, Vice President of Convention Sales with Visit Pittsburgh. And, you know, Carl manages a very seasoned team there in Pittsburgh and is responsible for attracting the meetings and conventions for not only Pittsburgh, but the entire Allegheny County. So thank you so much, Carl, for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
And you have a partner in crime here, Randy. Randy is Director of Sales of the Omni William Penn Hotel there in Pittsburgh. And you've been at that hotel for quite some time, haven't you, Randy?
Yes, I've been here for close to 20 years, and it's interesting because I'm a relative newbie when we look at some of the other staff members here.
Well, that's probably great to work in that kind of environment where you have all very veteran and seasoned staff. Well, we want to really talk about 3 tips to get big results for your small meeting. And, you know, before we begin, I want to really sort of give the audience some context to what the CVB or what a hotelier may consider when it comes to a small meeting. So, Carl, can you start us off and kind of give your perspective about how you define a small meeting?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. I think generally a definition of a small meeting, a lot of people would say is like between 10 and 100 rooms on peak night. And you know, for us as a CVB, we take that a little further, and generally we consider just about any meeting that fits into a single hotel to be a small meeting. But certainly that 10 to 100 peak is the good definition for us too. And you know, it's also relative to the size of a hotel. For a larger hotel like Randy's, that might truly be a small meeting. For a boutique hotel, you know, 50 on peak might be their ceiling. So it just kind of, there's a lot of definitions.
Well, and Randy, is your view consistent with Carl's? How does a hotelier look at a small meeting?
Yeah, well, I agree with what Carl said. I think it's the 10 to 100 certainly makes sense. And the important thing that he pointed out, it's also relative to the size of the hotel. So, for instance, we're a 600-room property. A group that has 50 rooms would be considered a smaller meeting here. However, if we were a 100-room property, 50 rooms would be considered a significant meeting, especially if we did a lot of transient business as well. So I think we're on the same page as far as defining the small meeting.
And we're going to get into that in a little bit about big and small hotels. But we thought we'd like to get a little bit of audience perspective about what they find when they're dealing with their smaller meeting. So for those of you that have joined us today, we'd like to understand what your frustrations and challenges. So we'd like you to use your question and answer box to kind of just input some of the things that you experience when you're trying to book a smaller meeting, whether you're dealing with a CVB or a hotel. And we'll be taking a look at some of your input as we go throughout the webinar and try to incorporate some of your frustrations and some of your perspectives as we go. So please feel free to include that, and both Randy and Carl will be able to kind of look at your responses and we'll address them. Because you know, when we think about this question, are small meetings important? We'd really like to get an understanding from both Carl and Randy about your honest take on the answer to this question. So, especially Carl, let's start with you in regards to a CVB's point of view, because, you know, isn't a CVB just interested in large meetings?
Well, I think that is probably a perception that's out there, Shimo. But the fact of the matter is CVBs, while we certainly are involved in citywide business and you know, we're a really integral part of that, smaller meetings are really the bread and butter of what we do every day. And many CVBs have salespeople specifically assigned to smaller meetings. Like we have somebody here that targets just rooms 100 peak and under for meetings. But looking at the business that we handle here at Visit Pittsburgh, over the last 2 years, we booked over 1,100 meetings, and 72% of those were with 100 peak rooms or less. Over 800 of those meetings were that size. Another 22% were between 100 rooms and 500 on peak, so still potentially a one hotel piece of business here. And only 6% of all those meetings were 500 rooms, 501 rooms or more, so potentially a multi-hotel or a citywide piece of business. So truly, we couldn't be successful without smaller meetings.
And how about you, Randy? You have a pretty good-sized hotel. What is your take on smaller meetings, and how does it impact your hotel?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's important to point out, as Carl said, we do a lot of small meetings, and if I were to quantify it, if we look at our bookings, about 61% of all the meetings that we book here at our hotel, and again, our hotel has 597 guest rooms, 61% of the meetings we book have 50 rooms on peak or less, and about 19% of those are between 50 to 150 rooms on peak. So that's a significant amount of business for our property, so they're very important. We have 8 sales managers here at the Omni William Penn, and all 8 sales managers in one way or another are booking smaller meetings.
Yeah, and Shima, this is Carl. If I can just add, we have one person dedicated to small meetings, but also the rest of our staff, and we also have 8 salespeople, they handle small meetings as well in their territories. So everybody is focused on that market.
So, I think that we have also seen just kind of very similar to what both of you have sort of reported, but, that kind of goes to the market at large, because the Hotel Business Review really did report out that 80% of all meetings have fewer than 50 participants. So, I mean, this is a huge impact, and I guess it's reflected in both of your numbers there. So thank you. Now, when a planner is looking at, they have a small meeting, and what should they look at in terms of a big hotel or a small hotel? Randy, why don't you kind of comment on a little bit about this that they might think about as they're starting to source a location for their small meeting?
Sure. I think they both have their benefits, and obviously I'm coming from a larger hotel perspective, so either work well for a planner, and I think the most important thing is for them to be familiar with the specific hotels that they're looking at. If we were to talk in general terms, larger hotels, they should be more heavily staffed. They should have more options perhaps for on-site dining, maybe more amenities, and also maybe they have more meeting rooms in general, so you have more options to choose from. Perhaps they have some rooms that are architecturally unique, have higher ceilings, might have different views, where a smaller property, by the virtue of their size, may have fewer meeting rooms, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they may not have all the amenities of a larger hotel. So I think with a larger property, we're looking to book as many small meetings as possible, and we're looking to book multiple small meetings at the same time. And in doing that, we're fortunate in the fact that we have several self-contained meeting centers. And I think that's also important for people when they're looking to plan a meeting. What space am I using? Is it free of other meetings that are taking place? Smaller meetings, just again, by the virtue of their size, they do have the nice all-hands-on-deck feel. You're that big fish in the small pond scenario. It's a nice cozy feel. And if you have the right location and you're near restaurants and nightlife, it can be a very attractive offer. I think maybe a con would be if a hotel's smaller and they only have a few meeting rooms, then there might be a premium for their space. So again, it's all it's relative to the specific properties. I think it's a supply and demand issue as well.
And Carl, we can see some of the frustrations that our planners have when they're, having to work with their meeting. From a CVB's point of view, some of the comments that we've seen is the inflexibility or maybe too much flexibility where the meeting gets moved around from meeting to meeting room before it's really finalized, or maybe they don't get the attention that they need. So what are the comments that you might help a planner that has a small meeting in this regard?
Well, I think there are benefits to both, a larger hotel or a smaller hotel for the planner that has a smaller meeting. Randy pointed out some of those really well. I think in larger hotels there could be more space to choose from, or more options. A smaller hotel, I believe, because a small meeting would maybe be their only meeting at the hotel at that time, they could be a little more flexible and offer some unique spaces or even public space as part of groups meeting options. And something else I just want to point out from a CVB standpoint, for planners planning any size meeting, but especially small meetings, CVBs, I think there's a myth that we operate where we'll send your lead out to every partner of ours, whether it's a good fit or not. And that's really not the case. That maybe it was in the past, but now we all really are very focused on directing any size meeting to the hotels that really meet the needs of the planner and what their objectives are. So please do understand that we'll just focus on the hotels that make the most sense, and we often look for feedback from the planner when determining, what properties to include. So.
Well, excellent comments. Now, okay, so let's just dive into these tips, because we have 3 tips that is really all about helping the planner gain some more clout with their small meeting. And I think we should say that all 3 tips, really may not be independent, but that they can actually all work together. So the first one, and it's really articulated in a lot of the frustrations our planners have, and it's about the space. It's about the meeting rooms you require. And generally, we think about meeting space relative to the number of sleeping rooms you contract for. So, Randy, help us understand the hotelier's viewpoint about their meeting space.
Well, quite simply, we use our meeting space to sell our sleeping rooms. So it is important to us that we use it appropriately, because our primary goal is to fill our hotel and to sell our guest rooms. So we need to do a good job of yielding our space so that we're still able to fill our guest rooms. With that being said, then it's important for us to review groups just to be sure that we have the right rooms to space ratio. And we can certainly work with groups who have perhaps more space than is typical and maybe a smaller room block, if they have the flexibility to work with us. And I know there's some things that we can discuss pertaining to that. So our meeting space obviously is very important to us. Again, we're using it to fill our guest rooms.
So if a planner does have a meeting that does require a lot of meeting space relative to the number of contracted meeting rooms, what suggestions or tips would you have with them about being able to have more clout even with that type of requirement?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one we come across from time to time. I think it's important to really tighten up your space and have a good understanding of what your space needs are. A good example is we might have a group that has a general session for 100 people and their meals are for 100 people, yet they'll need 4 breakouts, and they'll want each breakout set for 50 people. And if you ask the question, well, that's 200 people, you only have 100 people for your meeting, the response might be, well, we really can't plan accordingly. We need to sort of have that flexibility to go up to 50 people, just in case one particular breakout's more popular than another. So we usually ask if there's any way, if they're really concerned about, getting a good value and not paying rental or getting minimal rental, is there any way you can poll your people prior to your meeting to determine the size of those rooms? Because if we can get you a smaller room, then obviously we can get you less rental. Another thing would be your general session. Can you use your general session room as a meal room? With that being said, you could more than likely, and I can't speak for all hotels, but you could probably get that meeting room complimentary. Can your general session also perhaps be used as a breakout room? So anything you can do to condense your space will help you. Another thing too is if you just look at the type of sets that you're utilizing, if you think about it, if you set a room for 70 people U-shaped, that would require about 5,000 square feet. If you set the room for 70 people classroom, that would require about 1,500 square feet. Same adage, smaller meeting room, less rental. So if there's opportunities like that for you to utilize, then that's going to help you. Another thing might be, do you really need a 24-hour hold on your meeting space? Because 8 to 5 is a different price range than needing a room all day. Is there flexibility with your arrival departure pattern? Meaning, are you able to, instead of your room block peaking midweek on a Tuesday, Wednesday, which for a lot of city hotels are our busier days, are you able to incorporate a Monday, a Sunday, or a Thursday or a Friday in your room block? So those are just some things to think about. Another thing would be, if your group is very space intensive and you have a small room block and you're aware that there's perhaps a citywide convention or the hotel has a large rooms only piece of business, there may be opportunity for the hotel to be more flexible with you and give you more space at a more reasonable rate and work with you in that regard. You may pay a little bit more on your guest room rate. However, I think there's more opportunity for you to negotiate. I hope that helps.
Excellent. So let's go on to the tip number 2, because there is a whole notion about timing where planners with smaller meetings can really use to their advantage. So Randy, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how that might help a planner?
Sure. I think in just preparing for this webinar, one of the things that I researched was historically 60 days from the date of arrival. So from 60 days from any date of arrival, we have approximately 81% of our business already booked. So when you get within that 60-day window and you're getting closer to an arrival date where the hotel has availability, your negotiation power increases because our opportunities to book business are decreasing. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, that's based on the hotel obviously having the availability. Another thing to point out is if you're not booking meetings on the fly, meaning if you have time to plan it, you know that, hey, we'll start planning this meeting on this date, then take the time to research and check out some of the websites that hotels have up, because a lot of times you'll find need dates or value dates on these sites. And typically these are value-added packages that include discounts on audiovisual, food and beverage, and they'll give you more lenient contract language. So it's something good to look for if you're not planning on the fly.
Carl, what are some of your comments?
Well, there are several ways the CVB can also help planners in terms of timing, whether you're planning really short term or if you have a little more time to plan ahead. And a CVB, our staff, we know the nuances of our destination. So I think Randy's point is a great one about looking at hotel websites for their specific discounted packages and hot dates and that kind of thing. Something else CVBs could offer is that knowledge about local demand trends. For example, we know here in Pittsburgh, once the Steelers' schedule comes out for that fall, those weekends that they're playing home games are the highest demand of the year pretty much. So if you're planning in a meeting that would be over a weekend, we would know those are the ones you probably want to try to avoid unless you don't have a budget, you're willing to pay anything. Other local events such as a local marathon or college graduation can really drive up the demand for hotel rooms in the city, or citywide groups. And while a lot of planners of small meetings might just want to avoid citywide dates in the city because there's higher demand for the rooms and maybe less availability, that could also be a good time to try to plan a meeting, especially if your rooms to space ratio is a little heavier to the space, because at the CVB we know which hotels are involved in that citywide piece of business, maybe gave all of their typical number of guest rooms for group business to that citywide, but didn't get any space used for that group. So there could be a lot of space open at the hotel, a lot of meeting space available, and if you only had 10 rooms, that could be a perfect marriage for that group. Those are some of the ways that we can help. Also, if space isn't available at a hotel or isn't, it's not at the price you want, a CVB would know about some unique venues in the city. Maybe there's a museum across the street from a hotel, or some kind of alternate space that, for a group your size, there's a great opportunity to use, a non-traditional venue in conjunction with the sleep rooms at your hotel.
So all really good points about just getting a little bit more creative and understanding that when you're booking closer in, you may really find some opportunities. So our final tip is really addresses saving, really being able to get big results within your budget or to save some costs. And this is definitely something I know is all on our minds. And how we can be faced with opportunities when we're handling our meeting to have costs sort of escalate. So starting with Carl, what are some of the things that planners can do to save money or avoid those maybe unexpected events?
Well, I would say one of the first things to do, I just talked about high demand dates in the city. The CVB also should know what their low demand dates are. So, for example, if you have some flexibility on your pattern, maybe if you go a week or two earlier, or maybe the day of week pattern is a little flexible, we can help to guide you into dates that basically there's a lot of availability. So you'll find not only potentially lower guest room rates, but also maybe more flexibility in those terms for the meeting space usage and other amenities that you're using at the hotels. Also, I think the best thing any planner can do is really understand their meeting and what the value of it is. If you are heavy in food and beverage usage, if there's a lot of other revenue streams that you're bringing to the hotel, or maybe if your attendees are decision makers, they're all department heads who have their own meetings that they'll be planning. That's something that's really important for a hotel to know and could help to impact the price that you might pay for your space and for your rooms.
And Randy, how about you? Can you add some tips for planners on how they can save money and with their smaller meeting?
Sure. I think Carl hit it. And when he was saying know the value of your meeting, that's really important. If you know what your food and beverage expenditures are, sometimes people may send in an RFP and they admit that they're going to be doing AM, PM breaks each day. Well, that all adds up, and that certainly helps reduce your room rental. The other thing is are people that are attending your meeting, are they decision makers for potential other meetings that could be coming to the hotel that perhaps we know book in the Pittsburgh area? That adds some value and gives you some negotiation. And I think a really important one that definitely helps you save money is if you're able to bundle your meetings, if you book multiple meetings, and you're able to bundle them within a brand. For instance, with Omni, and I'm sure other brands have this, but we have a multi-year and a multi-meeting rewards based on the fact that we're receiving more than one meeting from you. So with that being said, you're able to receive discounts on your food and beverage, discounts on your audiovisual, rebates to your master account, things that'll definitely hit your bottom line. So if you have the opportunity to bundle, I certainly suggest that you take advantage of that as well.
Well, those are all excellent insights, and I would like to remind the attendees today that they're free to also ask any questions of our panelists, and we'll be handling that at the end. Now, Carl, Destination Marketing Association International is the trade association for convention and visitor bureaus. And we collectively talk about the value of working with the CVB. Can you share with the planners on the call maybe about why they would like to work with the CVB?
Sure. And, perhaps many of you have experience working with CVBs, or maybe some of you haven't tried that yet. But, CVB is really a resource for our entire city and region. And we're really we are the best first resource for any meeting planner. We can provide guidance and insider knowledge about our city, and our services are pretty much all for free. That's because a lot of our budgets are paid for by local taxes on the hotel rooms, so we don't need to charge for site visits or meeting planner kits, or even to help with getting your proposal out to hotels and putting that information together. Um, you know, the hotels definitely know their facilities, and there's a lot of great brands in every city. But again, the CVB, we're the one-stop shop kind of to help you not only with hotels, but the dining scene, the shopping, the activities for your attendees, and also what's going on in the city in and around the dates that you might be planning your event.
Well, and CVBs really do help meeting planners, and I think that there's an evolving role that CVBs are actually playing, right, Carl? Because I think that their planners are dealing with so much, because oftentimes planning a meeting is not their sole responsibility. They also get involved in other marketing or even programming or even other strategic planning. So sometimes just doing the basics in planning a meeting is very, very difficult and time-consuming. So, I think that our CVBs have really taken on the role to help educate planners and facilitate what their needs are. But even in dealing with the local hotels, I think that it's great to have an advocate for you who can really speak to their local hotels about the value of your meeting. So these are things that I think that are especially unique about working with your local convention and visitor bureau. And like Carl, you mentioned before about understanding the local demand factors, because if you can understand that prior to sending out your RFP, you're going to save a lot of time. So understanding what the occupancies, whether it's a business-heavy transient demand, so you're going to want to get your best rates maybe on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday versus a Monday, Tuesday. These are really nuances that I think would really help planners understand, and every destination may be slightly different. But I think that you can really get a good response to hotels and their proposals if you're really able to put your best foot forward and get all the information out prior to, and certainly Carl and his team and other CVBs are able to help you with that. So DMAI has a product, a website. It's a meeting planning tool, empowerMINT.com, and many of you may have already used empowerMINT. But empowerMINT is a tool where planners, you can really instantly access a lot of information about destinations all in one place, and then get connected with folks like Carl directly. So come visit us at empowerMINT.com, and we'll be able to give you instant access to knowledge about destinations that you'll need. So as a reminder for today's webinar, you will earn a half an hour of CMP credit in the domain H site management. And like I said, we will be able to send you the certificate of the recording within 5 business days. Now, Carl and Randy, I think you did an excellent job giving our planners today some great insights. And in a minute, we will address some of the questions that I see we have in the question box. But let's introduce Sean from ePro Meeting Apps, our sponsor today. And Sean, we're really grateful to have you help us with our webinar today.
Oh, you're so very welcome. And I want to thank Randy and Carl for getting and producing this meeting today. They did a wonderful job, some great information out there. Yeah, just want to talk just really fast about ePro Direct. We produce mobile application solutions for meetings and organizations. Mobile applications are becoming a hot trend when it comes to large meetings and small meetings alike. And we have the ability to increase participant engagement, reduce any funds that are needed for printing material by having a mobile application, and puts the information, the valuable information at the fingertips of your attendees. My email is sean.colvin@eprodirect.com. We have solutions that start at only $1,000, and we have clients with large meetings and small meetings alike taking advantage of our mobile application. So I'd like to hear from anybody who's interested in getting more information. I will be sending emails out to everyone on the call, and I look forward to speaking with you and setting up any demonstrations that you would like.
Sean, thank you so much, and I think you're in the right space, right? Because everything is going mobile. We were just talking about that at DMAI about the fact that the printed agendas and the printed on-site guides, shouldn't that all now be mobile? So I think you're in the right space. Elaine, thank you for joining us, Elaine, on our team. Do we have some questions for Randy and Carl? Maybe I lost Elaine. Well, it seems.
Oh no, I am here. I am here, Shimo. I apologize
there you
about
are,
that.
Elaine.
It was the mute line. Well, we had a lot of people writing in, as you know, on the answer to the question you asked initially about some of the frustration, so to speak. But here's a good one. I guess any specific tips for meetings scheduled locally where rooms will not be necessary and meals are typically not included? We know we'll pay a higher rate for the space, but is there anything we could do to improve discussions contracts?
And that sounds like a good one for Randy.
Randy.
So,
thinking. Yeah.
Sure. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it would be a piece of business that does not have guest rooms with it, just the need for meeting space.
Yes.
Okay. Any tips to help you negotiate? Again, it would come back to having a good understanding of what your spend is in terms of food and beverage and any other types of resource revenue that might be associated with it as far as audiovisual. I would say, too, just keep in mind that if you're planning something like this and you're trying to get the best value, if you're pricing multiple hotels and they want your business because there's a need to fill their space, then they're going to work with you. And if you give them an idea of what your budget is and perhaps what you're being quoted from other venues, if what you're receiving is not in line, if the hotel needs the business, they're certainly going to work with you. Now, I say that with the caveat, again, it's supply and demand. I mean, if your space is tight and you don't have a lot of space left to sell and we're 6 months out, then it might be a different story versus you're being 60 days in and needing the space. I hope that helps answer. It's kind of a question.
So Randy, I think that also what is good is to equip our planners with maybe what questions should they be asking that would help them with their contracting process, because every hotel has some sort of window where meetings that do not require any guest rooms can sort of fall in, and every hotel's window might be a little bit different, but you kind of call them when they have an opportunity for a free sale. And that's not going to be 2 years out, but it might be a lot closer in. So would it behoove planners to be able to ask those questions?
Yeah, well, I think Carl actually mentioned it. If you're aware that there's a group in the city that's utilizing the majority of the hotel rooms, and your CVB is a great place to check, or the CVB of the city you're going into. For instance, I know in May of 2015 that we have a group that's a citywide, this is just a random one, where the majority of our space is available. So that's a year out almost, and there'll be opportunity for you to negotiate. So if you were talking to Carl or someone on his staff and he were to be able to give you those dates, then that would certainly help you.
Yeah, and I'll, if I can chime in just a little bit here too, from the CVB standpoint, we can, for a meeting like that has no sleeping rooms and maybe not even any food and beverage, that's a great potential, not to take business away from the hotels, but maybe to look at a non-traditional venue like a museum or a science center or something like that. And I can tell you a lot of those types of venues, if you're a planner for an association, they offer significant discounts to nonprofit organizations. So that's just something else to keep in mind, and that's an area that a CVB can maybe help lend their local expertise. But if you're, if you really are looking at the hotel option, a lot of hotels, once you get closer, and Randy talked about how within 60 days, most of their business is already booked. If you're planning shorter term, there's certainly, and I come from a hotel background as well, I know there's a free sell period where catering or the people that handle meetings without rooms have more access to the meeting space and more flexibility in booking that kind of event.
Yeah, and it might even be, it could just be a question to ask, does your hotel have any dates in which you have catering free sale available? And I know that sounds like an insider term, but if you were to say that to most hoteliers or people that you're dealing with, they would know what you're referring to. And that would make you come across as someone's knowledgeable and, with an understanding that you have certain expectations in mind. So that's a good question to ask.
Are there any other questions out there for us, Shimo?
Yeah.
Hi, Carl.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Well, just falling in line with the catering, just the question that comes up, and I know this is getting pretty specific, but just they've heard that if you choose your menus, if you're a small meeting, you choose your menus around maybe a larger event, can you save some money that way? Obviously, that's something you might work direct with your convention services contact on, but for small planners, curious about that. Does that question make sense, Randy?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's really going to be a difference in your pricing for menus if you're a larger group versus a smaller group. It's going to depend upon the time of year and then just asking the question. And if you have a specific budget where I can only pay X number of dollars for my dinner, is this something you can work with me on? And then perhaps we can create a menu that's outside of what we have listed on our published menus specifically for your group. So if you have the flexibility to not go per se directly off the banquet menus, but to work with someone, then there's the chance that you can get a discounted menu. I mean, there are times of year within most cities where everyone's fighting for business. So it does give a planner a good opportunity to negotiate, and that would apply to menus and to food and beverage pricing.
Great, thank you. Shima, that was about all.
Well, I want to thank everyone, both Randy and Carl, for really helping us out to kind of dive into what planners can do and how they can leverage their smaller meeting. I think that we had a lot of quiet interest in the discussion today, and I want to thank everyone for attending. Please be on the lookout for our webinar replay that you'll receive, and we'll see you there in empowerMINT.com. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shimo. Our pleasure.